Good morning, everybody, and welcome to my kitchen. I know this isn't what I usually say, but today I'm going to make a video about how I make macarons. Now, I am 100% not an expert at macarons. I've made them maybe 3 times in the past, and the rate is about once a year. So I'm going to be essentially following this recipe right here, Basic Macarons Italian Method. It came from Let the Baking Begin, I guess. I found it online. And essentially I'm going to follow this recipe, but this is for a plain basic macaron, and I am going to do 2 different flavors. My first flavor is going to have a raspberry shell and a lemon curd filling. And my second flavor is going to have a chocolate shell and a Nutella filling. So follow along. This is not a cooking instructional video. This is just me making macarons, and you get to see how they turn out. I'm going to, jump around and skip the boring parts, not make you watch me stir sugar for an hour. But hey, let's see how it goes. All right, so the first step is to get all of my ingredients prepped and ready to go. A lot of times in recipes, I ignore when it says sift my flour. In this case, I will be sifting my almond flour and my powdered sugar together. It works a whole lot better, and your macaron batter is smoother if everything is sifted nicely. So I'm going to be weighing out and sifting my almond flour and my powdered sugar. So I've tiered a scale here with this big bowl on it. You can see that says 0, and I'm going to go ahead and put in my 212 grams of powdered sugar. I'll do all the sifting when this is done. Let's do 21, 16, 13, 212. Okay, set my sugar aside. And over here I have some almond flour. And I need 212 grams of that as well. Oh, that means I need to get to 424. I should have tiered that again, but close enough. 424 grams of almond flour. So I'm going to go ahead and sift this into this other bowl. They want you to sift this multiple times to get it good and mixed together. This time, as I'm doubling it up, I'm going to go ahead and add the raspberry powder, all of it, with the powdered sugar. That way, with the sugar, I don't know if that's exactly the right thing to do, but it won't bother me if they're slightly less sweet. So let's just add all that in. Raspberry powder. This raspberry powder I just bought on Amazon, and that was actually a couple years ago. So here's the raspberry powder. As you can see, that brought me actually up to 247. So I'm going to tare this again, and I'm going to add my almond flour now. Yeah, close enough. As you can see, I'm not a super strict recipe follower. That's sometimes bad. Let's stir this up. And I'm going to sift this right into my original bowl of mixture. Alright, so I'm going to leave this sifted material here and move on to the next step. Alright, what I ended up doing next, which is going to make life easier for me later on, is that I split the raspberry, once I had it all mixed, into 2 even batches. So my batches of raspberry are going to be just the same as making the batch of chocolate, and it's going to be a single batch, which it's going to make it easier to make. But it did allow me to divide that raspberry powder evenly and sift it through. So I'm going to put 1 batch of raspberry aside to be used later, and I'm going to continue working with the other batch of raspberry. Alright, well the next step in the process is that I need to separate eggs. I gotta have the yolks and the whites separate. I'm gonna go ahead and separate a whole dozen eggs by separating them into this egg separator and dividing them into these 2 bowls. That way I can just weigh out the portions of egg white that I need later, and that I have the egg yolks left. I will need egg yolks later. I'm going to be making a lemon curd for the filling of the lemon and raspberry macaron, and that any leftover eggs that I don't use, I can always just mix back together and make an omelet. It's no big deal. So to get started, I always just crack my eggs on a plate. I'll put them in here. I don't always use an egg separator when cracking eggs, but since I have one, and these eggs are particularly snotty. They are not the freshest eggs. I have had these eggs for a little while, but that's okay, they're fine. It's one thing about eggs. They last a while. If there's a little egg white in my egg yolks, it doesn't really matter. What I want to avoid is having any egg yolk in my egg whites. Let me dump these out. I want to make sure everything is good every time. Okay, so the next step is to divide my egg whites into 2 portions. In this case, I'm going to have more than 2 portions because this is a whole dozen eggs. I should have way more than I needed of egg white. But the recipe calls for 87 grams of egg white to get mixed in with the powdered sugar mixture, and then 90 grams of egg white to be set aside to be made into a meringue. In this case, because I have extra weight and extra material in my powdered sugar, I'm going to go ahead and do 90 and 90, make it an even split. It should be fine. So I'm going to get 90 grams of egg whites into this bowl. Too much. Knew that was going to happen. Let me grab a spoon. 90, perfect. So I'm going to take this egg whites and I'm going to mix it right into my single batch. This is a single batch. So you're supposed to stir it into here and make it into a paste. Scraper to stir that in really good. Now that I have a nice paste here, I'm going to scrape it down and get it to all into one spot. I don't want any of it to dry out on the side of the bowl because it's going to be sitting here like this for a while. I'm also going to cover this with plastic wrap. Like I said, I definitely don't want this to dry out at all. I just want it to stay moist and ready for later. Now that that's been set aside, the next step is to weigh out my second 90 grams of egg whites and set them aside. This is going to be for the meringue itself. So let's get 90 grams in here. Oops, way more than 90 grams, as usual. 91. That won't hurt anything. So I'm gonna have those 90 grams of egg whites. I'm just gonna set it aside. I don't need it right now. I'll put it over here next to the yolks. All right, well that part's done. And now we're gonna move on to the stage where we make the meringue itself. Here's our egg whites for that. All right, in order to make the syrup, the first thing I need is 236 grams of sugar. So I have granulated sugar right here. Yes, even though this is a sandy color, this is still just granulated sugar. I think there was like a sale on that Morena cane sugar at Aldi, so I didn't buy white sugar, I bought this stuff. But still the same thing. Right. Approximately 236 grams of sugar, really 237, because I'm so precise. I'm going to put that in my pot right here. In my pot, I have a candy thermometer. The candy thermometer is important in this case. We have to mix the sugar with the water and heat it up to, I think it's 247 degrees, and that does need to be fairly precise because what you're creating is a syrup that we will then mix in with our egg whites as they're beating, which will make these egg whites extremely stiff. We're making an Italian meringue. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to make a syrup that's going to get mixed in with my egg whites to make an Italian meringue. These are going to be Italian meringue macarons, which supposedly are less difficult to mess up than French meringue macarons. A French meringue is basically just beaten egg whites and sugar, whereas Italian meringue is a syrup that you make and you pour into your egg whites as you beat them that creates a slightly more stable meringue. I'm not sure how much more stable or if it is actually easier. I just believed the stuff that I read, and I've never made the French macaron version before, so this is what it's going to be. So I'm going to add the appropriate amount of water to this pan, and we're going to just let this sugar and water cook until it forms a syrup at the correct temperature, and then we will beat it into our egg whites. So I'm going to add 158 grams of water to my 236 grams of sugar. I'm going to give that a quick stir and turn on the heat under here. And let that melt down and cook. It could take a little bit. I'm not gonna video that entire process. All right, now I'm waiting for the mixture here, the syrup, to get to 235 degrees. Between 235 degrees and 240 degrees, the instructions say to go ahead and start my egg whites mixing in the mixer here. So I will put in these egg whites and just get a slight froth on them, and then wait for the syrup to get to 248 degrees. And when the syrup is at 248 degrees, that is when it is going to be time to pour this into my mixer, into the meringue while it's whipping on high. So it sometimes takes quite a while for syrup to get up in temperature. It reaches a certain temperature, all the water will boil off slowly, and it basically is stuck at that temperature while that water is boiling off, and then it'll start to move up in temperature again. It doesn't really help that the fog from the steam from the pot fogs up my thermometer and makes it hard to read, but it's almost 225 degrees. And so we've got a little ways to go, but I do need to keep an eye on it. All right, well, my sugar is almost to the correct temperature, so it's time to do the next step, which over here, as you can see, I have, let's raise this up just a little bit, aim this down. My stand mixer ready to go. I'm gonna go ahead and put my whisk on there. And into my stand mixer, I'm gonna pour that 90 grams of egg whites that I had saved. And I'm also gonna raise this up, turn it on, and it says to whisk it. It's asking me to whisk it with 2 tablespoons of sugar until it's slightly foamy, and that's what I'm going to do. That looks slightly foamy to me, so we will wait for it to get to the appropriate temperature, and then we will come in quickly with the sugar syrup. All right, now is the time to pour in the syrup. So I'm going to turn this on high. Here we go. Now while that mixer goes in the background, that has to go for 8 to 10 minutes until it completely cools off and the meringue has the peaks that it needs. And so I will show you that when it is finished. Okay, my meringue has finished whipping. As you can see, like if I pull this up, there's a peak on there that slightly bends, and that's how you're supposed to tell that this meringue is done. The way, yeah, beautiful. Okay, the next step is to take my raspberry egg paste, raspberry sugar and eggs, and to fold into it all of the meringue that I just made. So I'm going to start with just a little bit. You want to do this a little at a time. The first part you mix in really well in order to break up the paste. And then as you go, you need to do more and more light folding in order to get the texture of the mixture correct. So I'm just going to take everything that was stuck to the whisk, well, as best as I can. Set this aside and just cut this in here as good as I can. I'll go ahead and add some more. Second batch. And this time I'm going to do a little bit more of a folding action and not a stirring action. I want this to be light and fluffy, and you have to have the correct texture for macarons or they won't work right. One of the mistakes that people make when making macarons is that their batter is the wrong texture, overmixed, and they don't puff up properly the way they're supposed to. I'm not sure exactly what the deal is, but that's how it seems to work. Now, as you can see, I've pretty much lost all of my pink color. So these are not going to be a very pink macaron unless I add food coloring to them. But I kind of didn't want to add food coloring to them. I was thinking that the raspberry would have enough color to hold it up, but it doesn't. Should have known better. But if I was going to add food coloring should have been added to the meringue itself before I started this process. So as you can see, it's going pretty well. To make sure I get all the way down to the bottom of the bowl and to get all of the mixed material mixed in. There's still some clods of paste here that I need to make sure I get folded in nicely. If you want to know how to do this exactly, there's a billion tutorials online of how people do this. Like I said, I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination. So what you get here is just me making macarons, and you can see about how much effort it takes. I'm definitely an amateur cook. I am not a professional baker by any stretch of the imagination. But as I said in the introduction to my channel, I'm one of those people who does a lot of things well because I enjoy doing a lot of things. So, but nothing I do is expert. And I don't really regret that. It is what it is. So the instructions say that the texture you want for your folded up meringue mixture is that it says it falls off the whisk like lava, making a thick ribbon, and I can draw a number 8 with the ribbon. So as I fold this, well, it's not quite, it's a thick ribbon for sure. I don't know if it's quite the texture that I can draw a number 8 with. Well, maybe it could use a little bit more mixing. Just to loosen it up just a smidge more. Well, I think that this is pretty close to a thick ribbon. It's not quite loose enough to draw a number 8 with. It breaks before it gets that far. Well, hey, I did it. I don't know if you can even see that, but I drew a number 8 with my ribbon. So I guess it's perfect. Nothing's ever perfect, but this will work great. So let's cut this off and then I will set up for the next step. All right, so the next step is that I'm going to fill a piping bag with my meringue, my macaron mixture. And the best way I find to do that is I use a giant silicone piping bag for this, and I use my biggest icing tip, which to be honest isn't very big. This one is a Wilton number 12 tip, but that's the biggest one I have. And I use a glass to help me. So if I fold this over like this, nothing is gonna leak out, and I just put it in the bottom of the glass, fold it over, and then I fold the bag over the top of the glass, and I set it up so that as I go, I can pull up the sides and fill this completely with the meringue mixture. It stands nicely in a glass, and it's easy to not be too messy about it this way. Either way, it's messy, to be honest. So let's go ahead and fill this up. It's going to take more than one filling probably to get all of this piped out. And keep in mind, this is one batch. This is how much a single batch of that recipe that I showed will make. I put the materials aside to do the second batch, which is good because I didn't actually have enough eggs to do that many. I didn't realize how much egg it was going to take. I'd forgotten. It's what happens when you don't do something very often. It's like you have to remind yourself every time exactly what's going to be necessary to make it happen. That's okay. I have everything I need to get one batch out, and probably one batch is going to make quite a few macarons. Ugh, sticky. Jiggle this down a bit. I think I'm going to be able to fit it all in the bag in one go. That does make it more awkward to use, but to be honest, reopening the bag and filling a second bag is so sticky and messy that I would rather avoid it. So this looks like I mixed it pretty well. I'm not finding very much unmixed in material in my bowl either. So let's scrape this all in the best I can. Now I'm gonna have to go wash my hands off. Ugh. This stuff is very sticky. That's one thing to keep in mind. So I will be right back. So the next step, as you might have guessed by the pans being here, is for me to go ahead and pipe out my macarons onto these trays. I have these fancy silicone mats that have the circles on them to help you pipe out macarons. I only have 3 of those. I usually need a 4th pan to do a batch of macarons. Now there is a learning curve here. I have not done this in ages, so it's going to take me a while to get it down really well, but I tend to squeeze down and use my hand at the bottom to get a good squeeze. They're not going to be perfect at first. I try to keep the point centered over top of the little dot on the mat. And I try to keep them all the same size. That's why the circle is there. They're not perfect. Nobody's going to complain. But if they're not similarly shaped and sized, they don't sandwich together as well. I mean, you have to remember that the whole point of this is that I'm making a sandwich cookie. I'd switch hands. I think that I might be better squeezing with this hand. Oh yeah, that's a lot better. I have much more control. I don't know why I was trying to do this part with that hand. So center it down, squeeze the same amount every time, and it's easy to get the same amount out every time because my hand is staying in the same place. It gets more difficult as you your hand gets tired and as you run out of batter. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get these piped out, and when I'm done, I'll show you the next step. Okay, well that actually piped out fewer than I thought it would, but I do have all 3 pans filled up, well, except for that one last one in the corner. There's always going to be 1 or 2 that don't work out in the end too, but I'm going to show you the next step. What I have to do is bang these on the counter to settle them down and make sure that there's no air bubbles in the macaron shells themselves. So here we go. My batter was a teeny bit stiffer than it had to be in this case. So let me just take some of the points down. And once I've got the points off of here, which weren't settling themselves. If my batter was a little thinner, the points would have settled themselves when I beat them on the counter. But you know, not perfect. There's always a way to fix not perfect, and it doesn't have to be perfect to taste good. All right, well, as you can see, I have beaten them as best as I can. They are a little bit stiffer than I sometimes make this, and I'm gonna have to keep that in mind and make it a little bit thinner next time around. Yeah, peaky. I don't see any air bubbles that are trying to come to the surface that haven't burst, so it is what it is. The next step is actually just to let these sit here and dry out for a little while. We want to wait until the tops of these have a skin on them. And when there is a dry skin on the top, which might take about a half hour or so, then we're going to go ahead and bake them. But right now I'm going to read the instructions and preheat the oven to the appropriate temperature. Then we're going to wait until it's time to put them in the oven. Well, the last tray of the raspberry shells is in the oven, and at the same time as I've been baking those, I did mix up the paste for the chocolate macaron shells. I will be making those next, and let's go see how they turned out. So this was the first batch to come out of the oven. I've taken it off its trays. They look really good. They had nice little feet. The second tray of shells is right here. As you can see, because these had a chance to dry a little bit longer, the feet are actually even better on this tray. I'm gonna get the next tray out and put it here, and by then this tray will be cool enough that I can take them off of their pan. You have to let them cool completely on the tray before you take them off, and hopefully they don't end up sticky on the bottom, and you end up with beautiful macaron shells that you can later make into sandwich cookies. So anyway, that's how the shells for the raspberry turned out. The next thing you'll probably see is shells for chocolate as well. Okay, welcome back. Well, as you can see, I've piped out the chocolate macarons, and they've been sitting for about 40 minutes, and the first batch of them is in the oven. Now, in the meantime, while those are baking, what I want to do is jazz up these guys a little bit. The raspberry macaron shells, well, lovely and pink, are really a bit on the dull side. They're not that exciting. So I have this pink luster dust, and what I'm going to do is just brush some luster dust onto every macaron shell, just so that when I get around to putting them together at a later time, they will be pretty. So we got bright pink luster dust. I only messed with this a couple times in the past, so let's see what we get. I've got a little brush that came with it. Let's see what happens. Yeah. As you can see, one thing I've already done is pair up my macarons with each other. I'm going to go ahead and grab a little plate to use with the luster dust so that I don't contaminate the powder itself. There we go. Ooh, a little goes a long way. It's probably plenty of luster dust to do this entire batch of pink macarons. So I'm not really sure if I want to paint the whole thing or just do like a swoosh across. That's kind of cool, like a paint streak. It looks kind of classy that way. Anyway, I'm gonna do that while my macarons bake. Well, here we are. I've got all the chocolate macaron shells out of the oven, and I've swiped a little luster dust on each of the raspberry ones. And basically now this can just sit here until I'm ready to deal with it. It's lunchtime, and then after that I need to actually make the lemon curd, which will be the filling for the raspberry macaron, and then we'll see what happens. Okay, well, the next thing I have to make is the filling for the macarons. The chocolate macarons are easy. I'm just going to fill them up with Nutella, but I'm making a fresh lemon curd for the lemon raspberry macaron. I'm using a recipe that is at sallysbakingedition.com for making lemon curd. I've made lemon curd one time before, and it turned out great, so I'm sure this is going to turn out just fine. In order to do this, I need 4 egg yolks. As you can see, I have plenty because I was making macarons. I need 2/3 a cup of sugar, which I'll get out in a minute. A tablespoon of lemon zest, so I'm going to zest this lemon with this grater. I don't have a zester, so we use what we have. Some butter, and lemon juice, 1/3 of a cup, which it says is about 2 to 3 lemons. These lemons are big. I don't know how many lemons it's going to take to do that, but I'll juice the lemons. So as soon as I've gotten all of these ingredients ready, I'll show you how it goes. All right, now that I have everything together, this should go really, really quickly. I'm starting out with my eggs, and I'm gonna add my lemon juice to the bowl. I add my sugar to the bowl, and I put my lemon zest right in there with it. I imagine you can make this without the zest, and that the zest is going to make it a little bit chunky. And then you mix this all up, thoroughly mix it. I need to add just a little bit of salt to this. Let me find some salt. Stir it up good. Once it's all mixed up, basically you're supposed to cook it over a double boiler, constantly whisking until it thickens up. So I have my homemade double boiler here, just a pot of water on a stove. I'll drop my bowl into it, and I just need to start whisking. Now they say this is going to take 10 minutes to cook, and I need to keep stirring this constantly because what I don't want to have happen is my eggs to scramble and turn into cooked eggs. You want to cook this on high until it thickens up, and you need to constantly stir it the entire time. But I'm not going to leave this camera running for 10 minutes. So, you know, I'll be back in a minute. Alright, so I'm still stirring. I've got about 1 minute to go. The instructions or one set of instructions I read said that this is done when it looks like hollandaise sauce, which it kind of has for a while, and also when it looked like it coats the back of a wooden spoon. So I'll probably, when the last minute is up, I'll check that and see if that's true. If it doesn't yet, I will go ahead and just keep stirring for a little while longer before I cut in the butter. So we're almost done stirring. As you can see, this is a fun way to spend 10 minutes, just whisking a pot on the stove. So exciting. It looks really good though. All right, so let's see how done it is. I would say that that coats the back of a wooden spoon. That is not an issue. All right, so the next step is to turn the heat off. And with the heat off, I'm gonna put in the butter, 1 tablespoon at a time. Oops, there's one. But each one is gonna dissolve in on its own. Keep whisking until they've all melted in one at a time. Slimy. All right, last tablespoon of butter going in. I'm hoping that in the end this firms up fairly nicely so that I can pipe it into the macaron shells easily. I mean, I could always spoon it into the macaron shells, but I want it to firm up mostly so that it stays where it needs to in the macarons. All right, well, that's that. Take this bowl out of here. I used up all the water. And then the instructions say to cover this with saran wrap. Make sure that the plastic wrap actually touches the curd while it's cooling. It prevents it from forming a skin, I believe. You don't want to have a skin on your lemon curd. So let's put the plastic wrap in the bowl. There we go. Seals that off. Set that aside. All right. Well, the next thing I'm going to do is pop that in the fridge and let it cool off. So now it's time to start filling the cookies. And as you can see, I've already gotten started. What I did to start is I made a type of, well, I can't call it royal icing, and I don't really know what you would call it, but I used meringue powder and Nutella, powdered sugar, and water. So it's kind of like a Nutella royal icing? Who knows? But what I wanted to do is make a dam around the edge of the macaron that would be more solid. That way when I put the Nutella, which is very soft, in the middle and put them together, the Nutella doesn't run out the sides of the macaron. So now what I'm going to do is fill the center of that with Nutella from a piping bag and then put together my sandwich cookies. So let's get started. Just put a blob in the middle of each one. It'll get squished down when I put the cookies together. I don't want to overwhelm the little dam that I built, although I probably will. I'm definitely not an expert at this. This is the first time I've used something like Nutella to fill one of these. The other times I've made macarons, I filled them all with a buttercream, which of course stays nice and stiff. Nutella is really rather soft at room temperature, but most of these are going to get used up tomorrow, and until then I'm going to put them in the fridge. So they should be okay, I hope. Even if they run out of their little dams a little bit, I bet that they will, for the most part, stay solid. Oops, I messed up there. Anyway, now that I'm done with that, I can just simply take my macarons, put the lids on them, and then I will put them away somewhere. All right, I'm back with my not really royal icing made with lemon curd. I'm gonna do rings around the outsides of the lemon macarons, and then I'll be able to come back and fill them properly, I hope. So let's do a ring around. This lemon filling didn't come out quite as thick as the version that I made with Nutella, but once I fill them and put them in the fridge, I think that they will work out just fine. And now I'm back with the lemon curd itself so that I can put lemon curd in the center of these. Now, as quickly as I can, I'm going to put the lids on all of them, and then I'm going to set them on a sheet pan and get them into the refrigerator. That way, hopefully, everything can set up really fast and they don't get soggy and the filling doesn't run out of them or anything like that. I really have no actual idea how this is going to work out. Curd tends to be a very soft filling, and when you fill with curd, you might end up with soggy macarons if you're not careful. That definitely is not what I want, but what I'm sort of worried about is that the curd is very liquidy and it's going to react with the not really royal icing stuff that I made and cause that not to actually set at all. That's definitely a possibility. But I won't know really until tomorrow, because as soon as I put these away, I am not going to look at them again or think about them again until I need them, because there won't be a single thing that I can do about it if it all goes wrong. It is what it is. I have to go with the idea that no matter what happens, they'll taste good. And that's it.